She seduced the two most powerful men on earth. She commanded armies. She ruled the richest kingdom in the world, and she came within inches of conquering Rome itself. But here's what nobody tells you. Cleopatra wasn't Egyptian. She murdered her own siblings, and her story isn't a love story. It's a calculated, brutal game of thrones that makes modern politics look like kindergarten. By the end of this video, you're going to learn the real Cleopatra. Not the Hollywood version, not the legend. The actual woman who played the most dangerous game in history and nearly won. I'm talking about smuggling herself into a palace rolled up in a carpet, staging one of the most elaborate seductions ever recorded, starting wars that killed hundreds of thousands, and choosing her own death rather than become a prisoner. This isn't romance. This is the story of the most ambitious woman who ever lived. A woman who looked at the Roman Empire, the most powerful force on earth, and said, "I'm going to control that." And she almost did. Forget everything you think you know, because the truth is way more insane than any movie ever showed you. This is the real story of Cleopatra, the queen who bet everything, won everything, and lost it all in the most spectacular way possible. And it starts with a family so twisted, so violent, so absolutely insane, that Game of Thrones looks tame by comparison. Before I tell you about Cleopatra, I need you to understand her family, because her family was insane. The Ptolemies, the royal family of Egypt, they had three defining characteristics. 1. They were impossibly, stupidly wealthy. Gold everywhere. Palaces that made Versailles look like a shack. They controlled the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. Money was not a problem. 2. They were grotesquely obese. Seriously. Historical records describe them as massively fat. Too much food, too much wine, too much of everything. 3. They murdered each other. Constantly. Brothers killing sisters, sisters killing brothers, parents killing children. It was a bloodbath that lasted 300 years. This was normal for them. This was family tradition. And into this absolute nightmare of a family was born Cleopatra VII. If she wanted to survive, if she wanted to rule, she had to be smarter, more ruthless, and more cunning than every single one of her psychotic relatives. And she was. 1st century BC. Egypt is the richest kingdom in the world, but it's weak. The glory days of the pyramids are 3,000 years in the past. Now Egypt is essentially a puppet state, protected by Rome, controlled by the Ptolemies, and the Ptolemies are a mess. Here's something that's going to blow your mind. Cleopatra wasn't Egyptian, not even a little bit. She was pure-blooded Macedonian Greek. Her family came from Macedonia, the homeland of Alexander the Great. Her ancestor was Ptolemy, one of Alexander's generals who took over Egypt after Alexander died. For 300 years, the Ptolemies ruled Egypt, and for 300 years, they didn't bother learning Egyptian. They spoke Greek. They lived like Greeks. They saw themselves as superior to the people they ruled. Except Cleopatra. Cleopatra was different. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler in 300 years to learn the Egyptian language, not because she was nice, because she was smart. She knew that to truly control Egypt, you needed the Egyptian people on your side, so she learned their language. She learned multiple languages, actually. She was a polyglot who could speak at least 7 languages fluently. She was also a mathematician, a philosopher. She studied astronomy, medicine, literature. She wasn't just smart for a woman. She was one of the most educated people in the ancient world, period. But intelligence alone doesn't keep you alive in the Ptolemaic family. You need to be ruthless. When Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XIV, died, she was about 18 years old. According to tradition, she was supposed to rule jointly with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. He was 10 years old. Oh, and she had to marry him, because that's what the Ptolemies did. They married their siblings to keep the bloodline pure. It's absolutely disgusting by our standards, but it was normal for them. So here's teenage Cleopatra, married to her 10-year-old brother, supposedly sharing power. But Cleopatra had zero intention of sharing anything. She started making decisions on her own, issuing decrees in her name only, removing her brother's name from official documents. She was basically saying, I'm in charge. The kid is irrelevant. Her brother's advisors saw what was happening. These were powerful men who controlled the young pharaoh like a puppet. They realized Cleopatra was a threat, so they did what the Ptolemies always did. They tried to eliminate her. They turned young Ptolemy III against his sister wife. They poisoned his mind against her. They raised an army. And in 48 BC, Cleopatra was exiled, driven out of her own capital, Alexandria, forced to flee into the desert. She was a queen with no kingdom, a ruler with no palace. Everything she'd been born to have was taken from her. Most people would give up. Most people would accept defeat. Not Cleopatra. She raised a mercenary army in the Syrian desert. She prepared to march on Alexandria and take her throne back by force. She was ready for civil war, ready to kill her own brother if necessary. The Ptolemaic tradition of sibling murder was about to continue. But then something happened that changed everything. Something that would alter the course of history. The most powerful man in the world sailed into Alexandria harbor. His name was Julius Caesar. What I'm about to tell you sounds like a movie. It sounds too dramatic to be real. But ancient historians recorded it. Multiple sources confirm it. Cleopatra, exiled and desperate, heard that Julius Caesar had arrived in Alexandria. She knew this was her one chance, her only shot at getting her throne back. But there was a problem. Her brother controlled the entire city. His soldiers were everywhere. There was no way she could just walk in and meet with Caesar. So she did something absolutely insane, something so audacious, so risky, that if it failed, she'd be captured and probably killed. She had herself rolled up in a carpet. Let me set the scene. It's 48 BC. Julius Caesar is 52 years old. He's the greatest military commander of his generation. He's conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, started a civil war, and defeated his rival Pompey. He's chasing Pompey to Egypt. But when he arrives in Alexandria, he gets news. Pompey is dead. Cleopatra's brother's advisors killed him, cut off his head, and presented it to Caesar as a gift. They thought Caesar would be pleased. He was not. Pompey was his enemy, yes, but he was also a Roman, a consul. Killing him was an insult. Caesar is now in Alexandria, staying in the royal palace, trying to sort out this mess. Egypt owes Rome money. There's a civil war brewing between two royal siblings. It's complicated and annoying. And then, late one night, a merchant arrives at the palace. He's carrying a large bundle, a carpet rolled up and tied. He says it's a gift for Caesar. The guards let him through. The merchant brings the carpet to Caesar's private chambers. Caesar is there with just a few attendants. The merchant unrolls the carpet, and out steps Cleopatra. Can you imagine this moment? The most powerful man on earth is suddenly face to face with this young woman who just smuggled herself past an entire army to meet him. Some historians say it was a carpet. Others say it was a linen sack. Doesn't matter. What matters is the audacity. This wasn't just clever. This was a power move. She could have sent a letter. She could have requested a meeting through official channels. But no. She made an entrance. She made herself unforgettable. Now here's where the legend gets muddy. Popular culture says she seduced him that night, that she used her beauty and charm to wrap Caesar around her finger. Maybe, but that's not the whole story. Not even close. Yes, Cleopatra was attractive. Ancient writers describe her as charismatic, magnetic, but they don't describe her as the most beautiful woman ever. They describe her as intelligent, witty, articulate. What captured Caesar wasn't just her looks, it was her mind. Remember, Caesar was one of the most educated men in Rome. He wrote books. He was a brilliant orator. He valued intelligence. And here's this 21-year-old woman speaking to him in perfect Latin, making political arguments, explaining why she was the rightful ruler of Egypt, not her weak brother. Why she would be a better, more stable ally for Rome. She made her case like a lawyer, like a politician, like an equal. Caesar, a man who'd spent his entire life surrounded by ambitious men, was meeting an ambitious woman who was just as ruthless and strategic as he was. He was captivated. That night, Caesar made a decision that changed everything. He backed Cleopatra's claim to the throne. Her brother and his advisors were furious. This was betrayal. This was an insult. They raised their army and attacked Caesar's forces right there in Alexandria. This became known as the Alexandrian War. Fighting in the streets. Naval battles in the harbor. At one point, Caesar had to swim for his life when his ship was attacked. But Caesar was Julius Caesar. He was a military genius. He'd defeated the Gauls, the Germans, countless enemies. A bunch of Egyptian soldiers weren't going to stop him. Caesar's legions won. Cleopatra's brother Ptolemy tried to flee across the Nile. His boat capsized. He drowned, weighed down by his golden armor. Cleopatra's brother husband was dead. She had her throne back, and she had Julius Caesar as her lover and protector. But she wanted more than that. She wanted to secure her position permanently. She wanted to tie herself to Rome so tightly that no one could ever threaten her again. So she got pregnant. Cleopatra gave birth to a son. She named him Ptolemy Caesar. But she had a nickname for him. A nickname that revealed her true ambition. She called him Caesarion, Little Caesar. This wasn't just a cute name. This was a claim. She was saying, this boy is Caesar's son. This boy is the heir to the Roman Empire. And she genuinely believed that her son would one day rule a combined Roman-Egyptian super-empire. But to make that happen, she needed to do something that no foreign queen had ever done before. She needed to go to Rome. After the Alexandrian War, Caesar didn't immediately leave Egypt. Instead, he did something very un-Roman. He took a vacation. He and Cleopatra took a cruise down the Nile, a 2-month luxury cruise on a massive gilded barge. They traveled with 400 ships in their fleet. It was a floating palace. This wasn't just romance. This was a political tour. Caesar was showing Egypt that Cleopatra was back in power, backed by Rome's military might. And Cleopatra was showing Caesar her kingdom, the source of her wealth. Egypt wasn't just rich. Egypt was the agricultural powerhouse of the Mediterranean. The grain that fed Rome came from Egypt. Whoever controlled Egypt controlled Rome's food supply. Caesar understood this. He understood Cleopatra's strategic value. Eventually, Caesar had to return to Rome. He had a civil war to finish. Pompey's supporters were still fighting in North Africa and Spain. Cleopatra stayed in Egypt and gave birth to Caesarion. But after Caesar defeated his remaining enemies, after he became the undisputed master of Rome, something unprecedented happened. Cleopatra came to Rome. She didn't come as a visiting dignitary making a short diplomatic trip. She moved to Rome. She set up residence in Caesar's villa across the Tiber River. She brought her son, Caesarion. She brought her court. She settled in, a foreign queen living openly as the mistress of Rome's dictator. The Roman people were shocked. This was scandalous. This was an outrage. First of all, Caesar had a wife, Calpurnia, a proper Roman wife. And here was this Egyptian queen, this foreigner, living in his house with her child. Second, Romans hated kings. They'd overthrown their monarchy 500 years earlier. The word king was an insult in Rome. They valued the republic, the Senate, the idea that no one man should have absolute power. But Caesar was acting like a king. He'd been declared dictator for life. He sat on a golden throne. He wore purple robes. And now he had this foreign queen at his side. Rumors started spreading. Dangerous rumors. People said Caesar was planning to move the capital from Rome to Alexandria, that he was going to declare himself king of a new Roman-Egyptian empire with Cleopatra as his queen. They said he was going to make Caesarion his heir instead of his Roman grandnephew, Octavian. Were these rumors true? We don't know. Caesar never got the chance to implement whatever plans he had. Because on March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March, a group of senators surrounded Caesar in the Senate house and stabbed him to death. 23 knife wounds. Brutus, Cassius, men he'd trusted, men he'd pardoned. They killed him. And the reason, the final justification they gave, was that Caesar had become too tyrannical, too kingly. Cleopatra's presence in Rome, her influence over Caesar, her Eastern luxury and ambition, all of it contributed to the conspirators' fears. She hadn't held the knife, but in a way, she'd helped seal his fate. When Caesar died, Cleopatra's world collapsed. She was a foreign queen in a city that hated her. Her protector was dead. Her son's claim to power was worthless. The senators who'd killed Caesar saw her as part of the problem. She was in danger. So she did the smart thing. She packed up her household and fled back to Egypt. Her gamble had failed, spectacularly, but Cleopatra was a survivor, and she knew something that the Roman senators didn't. Caesar's death wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of a new civil war, and civil wars create opportunities. After Caesar's assassination, Rome exploded into chaos. His killers thought they'd saved the Republic. Instead, they'd doomed it. 3 men emerged to fight for control: Octavian, Caesar's 19-year-old grandnephew and adopted heir; Lepidus, Caesar's former right-hand man; and Mark Antony, Caesar's most loyal general. These 3 formed an alliance, the Second Triumvirate, and they hunted down Caesar's killers one by one. But Cleopatra knew the alliance wouldn't last. Eventually, these 3 would fight each other for sole control. And when that happened, she needed to be on the winning side. So she watched, she waited, she prepared, and then Mark Antony summoned her to meet him. Mark Antony. Let me tell you about this man. Because he was nothing like Julius Caesar. Caesar was calculating, disciplined, strategic. Caesar wrote books and gave speeches and planned 10 moves ahead. Antony was a warrior, a legendary soldier, a man who could drink all night, fight all day, and win battles through sheer force of personality and courage. He was also a man who loved pleasure, wine, women, parties. He saw himself as a living embodiment of Dionysus, the god of wine and celebration. After the triumvirate defeated Caesar's assassins at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC, they divided the Roman world. Octavian got the west, Antony got the east, and the east meant he controlled Rome's relationship with Egypt. In 41 BC, Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus in modern-day Turkey. He wanted answers. During the Civil War, Cleopatra had been suspiciously neutral. She'd played both sides. She'd waited to see who would win. Antony needed her money, Egypt's gold, and he wanted to make sure she understood who was in charge now. He expected her to arrive as a humble subject, to beg for his favor, to offer tribute. He had no idea what was coming. Cleopatra prepared for this meeting like a military campaign. She knew everything about Antony, his personality, his ego, his love of spectacle. So she gave him spectacle. She sailed up the Cydnus River in a golden barge, not a normal ship, a golden barge, with purple silk sails, silver oars, rowed by her attendants dressed as cupids and sea nymphs. The barge was covered in gold leaf. Incense burned in braziers, filling the air with exotic perfume. Music played, flutes and harps and drums. And Cleopatra herself? She was dressed as Venus, the goddess of love. She reclined under a golden canopy, fanned by boys dressed as cupids. When word spread that the Queen of Egypt had arrived, the entire city of Tarsus emptied out. Everyone ran to the riverbank to watch. They'd never seen anything like it. Antony was left sitting in his official judgment seat in the empty marketplace, waiting for her to come to him. She never showed. Instead, she sent him an invitation to dine on her barge that evening. Do you understand the power move here? Antony had summoned her as a subject. She arrived as a goddess. She didn't come to him. She made him come to her. That night, Antony boarded her barge, and he was absolutely blown away. The luxury, the wealth, the entertainment. There were flowers everywhere. The ceiling was covered in roses a foot deep. The tables were solid gold. The food was incredible. And Cleopatra herself? She spoke to him in his language. She laughed at his jokes. She matched him drink for drink. She was witty, charismatic, intelligent, and fun. Antony thought he was meeting a scheming foreign queen. Instead, he met someone who felt like his equal, someone who understood him. He fell for her completely. They spent that winter in Alexandria. They created what they called the Society of Inimitable Livers, basically a club dedicated to having the most outrageous parties possible. They'd dress up as servants and walk through the streets at night, playing pranks on people. They'd have feasts that lasted for days. They'd drink and laugh and live like there were no consequences. But this wasn't just a party. This was a partnership, a political alliance. Antony controlled the Eastern Roman Empire. Cleopatra controlled Egypt's wealth. Together, they could create a new power block that could rival anything in Rome. They had twins together, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, sun and moon, and they started planning something audacious, something that would either make them rulers of the world or destroy them completely. In 34 BC, Antony and Cleopatra staged a public ceremony that shocked the Roman world. It was called the Donations of Alexandria, and it was basically Antony and Cleopatra playing dress-up as gods and giving away half the Roman Empire. What they did was so outrageous, so insulting to Rome, that it guaranteed war. And that war would decide who ruled the world. Imagine a massive public ceremony in Alexandria. Thousands of people gathered. A huge gymnasium filled with spectators. At the front, two massive golden thrones. On one throne sat Mark Antony, dressed as Dionysus, the god of wine and fertility. On the other sat Cleopatra, dressed as Isis, the mother goddess of Egypt. Around them, on smaller thrones, sat their children. The twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, their youngest son, and standing behind them, Caesarion, Cleopatra's son with Julius Caesar, now 13 years old. Antony stood and addressed the crowd, and he made proclamations that sent shockwaves through the Roman world. First, he declared Cleopatra the Queen of Kings. Not just Queen of Egypt, Queen of Kings. Plural. She was above all other monarchs. Second, he declared Caesarion the King of Kings and the true legitimate son of Julius Caesar. This was a direct challenge to Octavian, who was Caesar's adopted son and official heir. Third, Antony started giving away Roman territories. He gave Cyprus to Cleopatra. He gave Syria and parts of Turkey to the twins. He gave Armenia, which Rome had just conquered, to his sons. He was donating Roman provinces to his Egyptian family. Let that sink in. Antony, a Roman general, was giving away Roman territory to a foreign queen and her children. This was treason. This was insanity. This was a declaration that Antony no longer saw himself as a Roman serving Rome. He saw himself as an Eastern monarch, a partner to Cleopatra in a new empire. When news of the donations reached Rome, Octavian couldn't believe his luck. He'd been handed the perfect propaganda weapon. Octavian was a master of spin. He wasn't the greatest general. He wasn't the most charismatic speaker. But he understood public opinion. He launched a propaganda campaign that painted Antony as a traitor, a man who'd been seduced and corrupted by an evil foreign witch, a man who'd abandoned Rome for an Egyptian whore. He portrayed Cleopatra as the real enemy, an oriental sorceress who'd enslaved Antony with her dark magic and her decadent sexuality, a woman who planned to conquer Rome and make her bastard son its emperor. He read Antony's will to the Senate. In it, Antony requested to be buried in Alexandria with Cleopatra, not in Rome. This was the final straw. Antony had chosen Egypt over Rome. Octavian formally declared war. But he didn't declare war on Antony, his fellow Roman. That would be civil war, and Romans were sick of civil wars. Instead, he declared war on Cleopatra. This was propaganda genius. The war was now framed as Rome versus Egypt, West versus East, civilization versus barbarian decadence, and it would all be decided in one massive naval battle, the Battle of Actium. September 2nd, 31 BC, off the coast of Greece. Two massive fleets face each other. On one side, Octavian's navy, commanded by his brilliant admiral Agrippa, fast ships, experienced sailors, disciplined. On the other side, Antony and Cleopatra's fleet, massive warships, heavily armed but slow, crewed by inexperienced sailors. Everything was riding on this battle. If Antony won, he'd control the East and could challenge Octavian for all of Rome. If Octavian won, the world was his. The battle began, and it was a disaster for Antony and Cleopatra. A disaster that ended with one of the most controversial decisions in military history. The Battle of Actium should have been Antony's victory. He had more ships, bigger ships, more soldiers. But strategy matters more than size. Octavian's admiral, Agrippa, was a tactical genius. His ships were smaller, faster, more maneuverable. They could dart in, ram Antony's huge, slow warships, then retreat before Antony's archers could respond. It was like watching a boxer fight a wrestler. Antony's fleet was powerful but clumsy. Octavian's fleet was quick and surgical. The battle dragged on for hours, ships burning, men drowning, arrows and spears flying. And then something inexplicable happened. In the middle of the battle, Cleopatra's squadron of 60 ships suddenly broke formation. They punched through the lines and headed out to open sea. They were fleeing, running away from the battle. Antony saw her leaving, and he made a choice that destroyed his reputation forever. He abandoned his fleet. He abandoned his soldiers. He abandoned his duty. He grabbed a fast ship and chased after Cleopatra. Can you imagine what his men thought? Their commander, their general, the man they'd followed for decades, just abandoned them in the middle of a battle. His fleet surrendered. His army, still camped on shore waiting to fight, surrendered. Antony's military career was over. His honor was destroyed. Why did he do it? Why did he throw away everything? Some historians say he panicked. Some say he was so in love with Cleopatra that he couldn't let her leave without him. Some say it was a prearranged plan that went wrong. We'll never know for sure. What we do know is that Octavian won, completely and totally. The world now belonged to him. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt. Their armies were gone. Their allies had abandoned them. They were finished. But Octavian wasn't satisfied with just winning. He wanted Cleopatra. He needed her alive. Why? Because he wanted to parade her through Rome in chains. He wanted her as the centerpiece of his triumph, the ultimate symbol of his victory over the East. He pursued them to Egypt. His legions surrounded Alexandria. It was over. All that was left was the ending. Trapped in Alexandria, with Octavian's armies closing in, Antony and Cleopatra faced the end. They'd gone from rulers of half the world to fugitives in their own palace. They'd lost everything, their armies, their allies, their empire, their future. All they had left was how they died. And Cleopatra was going to control that, just like she'd controlled everything else. One final power move. One final victory. She would not be Octavian's trophy. In the palace in Alexandria, Antony received news. Someone told him that Cleopatra was dead, that she'd killed herself. Whether this was true or a miscommunication or a deliberate lie, we don't know. But Antony believed it. The love of his life was gone. Everything was gone. He called his servant Eros. He ordered Eros to kill him. Eros, loyal to the end, killed himself instead rather than kill his master. So Antony did it himself. He fell on his own sword, but he botched it. He didn't die immediately. He was lying there, bleeding out when messengers arrived. Cleopatra was alive. She'd barricaded herself in her mausoleum, a fortified tomb she'd built for herself. They carried Antony to the mausoleum. Cleopatra refused to open the doors for fear of being captured, so they lifted him up through a window using ropes. Antony died in Cleopatra's arms. Her second Roman, her partner, gone. Cleopatra was now completely alone. Her armies were defeated. Her lover was dead. Her kingdom was surrounded. Octavian's forces captured her. They brought her to him. The final confrontation. The 39-year-old queen who'd seduced two of the greatest men in history, and the 33-year-old Octavian, a man known for his cold, calculating intelligence. Cleopatra tried everything. She tried to negotiate. She tried to save her kingdom for her children. She even, according to some historians, tried to seduce Octavian. It didn't work. Octavian was immune to her charms. He'd spent years painting her as a monster in his propaganda. He wasn't about to fall under her spell now. He made his intentions clear. She would be taken to Rome. She would be displayed in his triumph. She would be paraded through the streets in chains while the crowds jeered at her. This was Cleopatra's worst nightmare. Her entire life she'd controlled her image. She'd staged entrances. She'd dressed as goddesses. She'd made men see her as she wanted to be seen. Now she'd be a circus attraction, a humiliated prisoner. A cautionary tale about the dangers of female ambition and Eastern decadence. She would not allow it. Octavian kept her under guard, but he underestimated her. He thought he'd broken her spirit. He was wrong. Cleopatra had her servants smuggle something into her chambers. Accounts vary on exactly what it was. Most historians say it was an asp, a venomous snake, hidden in a basket of figs. Cleopatra put on her finest royal regalia, her crown, her royal robes. She made herself look like a queen one last time. She lay down on her golden couch, and she pressed the snake to her breast. The venom worked quickly. By the time Octavian's guards broke into her chambers, she was dead. 2 of her handmaidens were dead beside her. They'd chosen to die with their queen. Cleopatra looked, according to the historian Plutarch, like she was sleeping. When Octavian found out, he was furious. She'd escaped him. She'd denied him his triumph. She'd controlled her own death and robbed him of his ultimate prize. But there was grudging respect, too. Cleopatra had won this final round. She died a queen, not a prisoner. Octavian had her buried with full honors next to Mark Antony. Their tomb was magnificent, though it's now lost to history. But Octavian showed no mercy to her children. Caesarion, Cleopatra's son with Julius Caesar, now 17 years old, tried to flee to India. Octavian's agents caught him and killed him. He couldn't allow Caesar's son to live. The boy was too dangerous, too legitimate a rival. Cleopatra's children with Antony were taken to Rome and raised by Octavian's sister. They survived, but disappeared from history. Egypt, the land of the pharaohs, the kingdom that had lasted 3,000 years, ceased to exist as an independent nation. It became a personal province of Rome. Not even a normal province, Octavian's personal property. And Octavian? He returned to Rome as the undisputed master of the world. He took a new name, Augustus, and he became the first Roman emperor. The Republic was dead. The empire had begun. Cleopatra had played for everything and lost. But in losing, she'd cleared the board for the very empire she'd tried to control. So, what do we make of Cleopatra? History has told her story 1,000 different ways. The seductress, the femme fatale, the exotic Eastern queen who corrupted noble Romans with her sexuality and luxury. But that's not who she was. That's Roman propaganda. That's the story Octavian wanted people to believe. The real Cleopatra was a brilliant politician, a strategic genius, a woman who looked at the most powerful empire on earth and said, I can control this. She was born into a family of murderers and survived by being smarter and more ruthless than all of them. She learned languages that her ancestors couldn't be bothered to learn. She studied mathematics and astronomy and medicine. She rolled herself up in a carpet to meet Julius Caesar, not because she was trying to seduce him, but because she was making a political statement. I am bold, I am brave, I am worth your attention. She sailed into Tarsus dressed as Venus not to seduce Mark Antony, but to demonstrate her wealth, her power, her divine status. Everything she did was calculated, strategic, political. Yes, she had relationships with Caesar and Antony, but these weren't love stories. These were partnerships, political alliances. She chose the 2 most powerful men in the world and made herself indispensable to them. She almost succeeded. She came within inches of creating a new Roman-Egyptian empire with herself and her children at the center. But she made mistakes. The donations of Alexandria was too much, too soon. It gave Octavian the propaganda weapon he needed, and Actium was a disaster. Whether she fled because she panicked or because she was executing a failed plan, or for some other reason, it doomed everything. But even in death, she won. She denied Octavian his triumph. She died on her own terms. She's remembered as a queen, not a prisoner. For 2,000 years, people have been obsessed with her. Poets wrote about her. Shakespeare immortalized her. Hollywood made her a legend. Everyone knows her name. How many other rulers from the 1st century BC can you name? How many Roman senators? How many generals? They're forgotten. She's eternal. But here's what most people get wrong. Cleopatra's story isn't about beauty or seduction. It's about power. It's about a woman in a world run by men who looked at that world and said, I'm going to change the rules. She couldn't command legions herself. Society wouldn't allow it. She couldn't march to Rome and conquer it with an army, so she did something smarter. She formed alliances with men who could command armies. She made herself essential. She used her intelligence, her wealth, her political skill to position herself at the center of Roman power. And it almost worked. Think about what she accomplished. She ruled Egypt for 21 years. That's longer than most Ptolemies managed before being murdered by their relatives. She expanded Egypt's territory through her alliance with Antony. She secured Egypt's independence for 2 decades in an era when Rome was swallowing every kingdom in the Mediterranean. She had 4 children who survived to adulthood, which was remarkable in an age of high child mortality. She learned multiple languages and became one of the most educated people of her time. She commanded navies. She raised armies. She negotiated with the greatest powers of her age as an equal. The fact that she ultimately lost doesn't diminish what she achieved. She was playing an impossible game in a world stacked against her, and she nearly won. Compare her to her brother Ptolemy III, who drowned in the Nile at age 13, a puppet controlled by his advisors. Compare her to her other siblings, who barely merit mentions in history books. Cleopatra mattered. She shaped history. The entire course of the Roman Empire changed because of her. If she'd never existed, if Caesar had simply installed her brother as a puppet king, Egypt would have become a Roman province decades earlier. The civil wars might have played out differently. Octavian might never have become Augustus. Her choices, her ambitions, her gambles, they rippled through history in ways we're still feeling today. But here's the most important thing to understand about Cleopatra. She was playing a game that men had been playing for centuries, forming alliances, seeking power, using whatever tools were available. When men did it, they were called brilliant strategists. When Cleopatra did it, Roman propaganda called her a seductress, a witch, a corrupting influence. The Romans couldn't accept that a woman, a foreign woman, could be just as ambitious, just as strategic, just as dangerous as any Roman man. So they reduced her to sexuality. They made her story about seduction instead of politics, about beauty instead of intelligence. For 2,000 years, that's the story that's been told. The exotic queen who seduced powerful men and nearly destroyed Rome. But the truth is more interesting. The truth is that Cleopatra was one of the most brilliant political minds of her generation. She was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. She saw the future. She saw that Rome was transitioning from republic to empire. She saw that whoever controlled Egypt's wealth and grain supply would have enormous leverage. She tried to position herself and her children at the center of that new empire. She tried to make her son with Caesar the heir to everything. It didn't work. Octavian was too smart, too patient, too good at propaganda. But the fact that she tried, the fact that she came so close, that's extraordinary. Cleopatra was the last pharaoh of Egypt, the last of the Ptolemies, the end of a dynasty that had ruled for 300 years, the end of an independent Egypt that had existed for 3,000 years. When she died, an entire era died with her. The Hellenistic age, the age of the successor kingdoms after Alexander, it all ended. A new age began. The age of Rome, the age of emperors. Octavian Augustus built an empire that lasted 500 years, an empire that shaped Western civilization, an empire whose influence we still see today in our language, our law, our architecture, our government. And Cleopatra played a crucial role in creating that empire, even though she was trying to prevent it. She forced Octavian to become the man who could defeat her. She pushed him to consolidate his power, to eliminate his rivals, to become Augustus. In a strange way, her greatest enemy became her legacy. The empire she fought against became the empire that remembered her. Because here's the final irony. Despite Octavian's propaganda, despite 2,000 years of being reduced to a seductress, Cleopatra won the long game. Octavian won the war, but Cleopatra won immortality. Augustus is remembered as a great emperor, but Cleopatra is remembered as a legend. She's in Shakespeare. She's in Hollywood blockbusters. She's in art and poetry and novels and documentaries. Everyone knows her name. Everyone knows her story, even if they don't know the true version. She became exactly what she always wanted to be: unforgettable, eternal, divine, the Queen of Kings, the woman who nearly conquered Rome not with armies, but with intelligence, ambition, and sheer force of will. The woman who looked at the most powerful empire on earth and said, "I can play this game too." And she played it better than almost anyone. So the next time someone tells you Cleopatra was just a seductress who used her beauty to manipulate men, you can tell them the truth. She was a polyglot who spoke 7 languages, a mathematician, a naval commander, a political strategist, a survivor who outlasted every member of her murderous family. She was a woman who rolled herself in a carpet and smuggled herself into a palace to meet Julius Caesar. She was a woman who sailed into Tarsus dressed as a goddess and made Mark Antony come to her. She was a woman who chose how she died rather than let her enemies control her final moment. She was a woman who played the most dangerous game in history and nearly won. She was Cleopatra VII Philopator, Queen of Egypt, the Serpent of the Nile. And her story is way more badass than any movie ever showed you. If this changed how you see Cleopatra, if you learned something you didn't know, share this with someone who still thinks she was just a pretty face. Because her real story, the true story, is so much better than the legend. She deserves to be remembered for what she actually was. One of the most ambitious, intelligent, and strategic leaders in human history. A woman who nearly changed the world. And in a way she did.